We're getting our sneak peeks for Sister Wives Kody to join Robyn at church so men don't think she's single. There's a lot of men interested. It's the two of them at the same place that him and Janelle had their breakup meal. And they're just discussing, and Robyn's like, hey, do you have a problem with the girls going back to church? And he's like, no. He's like, do you have a problem with me going back to church? And he's like, no, I'm going to join you eventually. I just want to make sure that I'm not being left out. And I find this really weird. Now, when I brought this up before, a lot of people are like, she just has personal growth. Their opinion's allowed to change. And that's true. But I've watched their show for 19 seasons. If they're going to have this big of a change, I would expect more discussion around it. When Christine felt that she no longer was part of the church, she discussed it. She talked about how she no longer believed in it. She didn't need a release because she didn't believe in it. She didn't believe in this. She didn't believe in that. We got more discussion when Maddie was considering the LDS church or when they left or anything. So part of my issue is not that they have changed their mind and they're going to join a different faith tradition than what they were in. That's, of course, their right. It's more of the fact that we're just not addressing it. We're not addressing the fact that the churches they're considering going to don't use the same religious texts as the religion that they were a part of. A big part of the early seasons was all about how polygamy and the early elders and the founders and Joseph Smith and all that kind of stuff. And they traveled to places and they cried while hearing the story. And now they don't believe any of that. They're going to go to a different faith tradition that doesn't believe any of that is related to truth or any of their beliefs about that. But what happens before you're born, what happens after you're born, that's my only thing, is the fact that they're not addressing it. But let's just pretend that they did address it. Now let's get into what's going on with this new church. So he talks about how I just don't want to be left out. He seems very, concerned that she's going to leave him as well. I don't want you going there too long without me because I don't want some guys thinking you're a single mom. And she's like, well, he's like, make sure you're wearing the ring. We see the huge ring. That some people have said it looks a lot like Christine's. Well, Christine's is a wedding ring. Robyn's is a wedding ring. It is interesting to me that she got a big old wedding ring. Anyway, and then we have this. There's a lot of men interested in Robyn. They were sort of trying to get around me to get to her. I cannot tell, based on this clip, if he is talking about Robyn back in the day, which this line, they were, past tense, sort of trying to get around me to her, or whether there's a lot of men interested in Robyn is present tense. So I'm not totally sure. One of the problems with trying to dissect anything Kody says is that he don't speak so good. And sometimes he uses the wrong tense. So do I. So don't point fingers at me either. But the idea is I can't tell whether he is implying that back in the day, a lot of men were after her, or whether he's trying to say now there's still men after her. I'm not sure which that is. They also talk about he wants to hear that God was his wingman, and he's like, the first time I saw you, I stared far too long. It was like a jolt of lightning. She agrees. But it's kind of weird because this time they mention it's at a church. Then she says she saw him at a church. Later on, they met at her cousin's driveway. But it's interesting to me because the story of how they met has varied a little bit. So in the early seasons and other times we heard about how they met at a dance. And I'm guessing maybe just meeting is one of those things where they're like, well, the first time I saw him was this. The first time I got introduced was this. The first time we actually spoke alone was this, or whatever. But it is interesting to me because I feel like I've heard many different versions of their first meeting story. And he goes on and on about how he just couldn't take his eyes off of her. And it would actually be sweet if it wasn't for the fact that we've watched 17 seasons of him lying and saying that, he loved all of his wives equally. Well, now he's trying to play he's trying to kind of play both sides of it was so special. It was so amazing, but he actually never loved his first wives. Actually, he did love his first wives. He just wasn't in love with them. Well, actually, he did love them and he was a perfect husband to all of them. But also Robyn was always special, and trying to kind of play both sides of the wall or the fence or whatever. So not a terribly interesting. I think my guess is that people are going to be like, boo, boo. We don't want to hear anything from Robyn and Kody. That's my guess on how people respond. Maybe they're going to be really super into it. But yeah, we're getting our sneak peeks. I guess they're going to be going back to church. I don't know if we'll actually see them going back to church or we'll hear anything about how their belief system has changed. But that seems to be one of the storylines that is coming up.